Resident Evil Requiem is a big deal. Being the 9th numbered game, it also happens to celebrate the series' 30th anniversary in a bold new way by introducing new characters and plot points to a highly established and very nostalgic location that was the setting of numerous earlier mainline and spin-off titles, Raccoon City. Capcom's deliberate choice of the name Requiem not only makes it so that Resident Evil 9 conveniently fits into the title, but also suggests that it's a return, a remembrance, if you will, of some of the most memorable and defining qualities of the franchise as a whole. There is perhaps no better location than the present-day ruins of Raccoon City for Requiem to take place, and while the more recent Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil 4 remakes all showcase the events of the outbreak and the near aftermath of the Raccoon City Incident, there are 3 other mainline Resident Evil games that are yet to receive the modern RE engine glow-up that they are on track to receiving. That's right, we got the first Resident Evil Remake Trilogy with these games, but post-RE Requiem, we are exceedingly likely to get the second RE Remake Trilogy, and with Capcom a year and a half ago confirming that more remakes are indeed coming, I thought it's time to dive into what this next Remake Trilogy may look like, going over the latest rumors and leaks as Resident Evil crosses into its 30th year. As always, boulder punch that like button. Comment down below which Resident Evil games you'd like to see part of the next Remake Trilogy, and participate in my latest giveaway of the next big Silent Hill game, Silent Hill F, releasing this September. All details are linked in the description. As we await Resident Evil Requiem, Capcom has been promoting sales of what they officially tout as the Resident Evil Remake Trilogy, including their latest RE engine third-person over-the-shoulder glow-ups of Resident Evils 2, 3, and 4. These games are all incredibly popular, all having moved upwards of 10+ million units a pop, and well, the success of these remakes has not gone unnoticed by Capcom. At a PlayStation Partner Awards event in Japan a year and a half ago, Resident Evil 4 Remake game director Yasuhiro Anpo announced that Capcom is committed to remaking more games from the Resident Evil franchise. "We've released 3 remakes so far, and they have all been received very well," remarked Anpo. "Since it allows a modern audience to play these games, it is something I am happy to do as someone that loves these older games, and we want to continue doing more." He continues further with, "What game we will remake in the future is something that we would like to announce in the future, so please look forward to it." So we all know that more remakes are on the way, but exactly which remake is going to make it out first? This is where the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem plays a role here, as Requiem pays homage to the history of the franchise. This is being done by including gameplay that is familiar to both the more recent first-person mainline titles and the recent third-person remakes, but also by taking the series back to what can be argued as the most iconic setting we've seen from the series thus far in Raccoon City. Requiem is like a full circle moment for the franchise, taking the series back to the earlier chapters of this 30-year-old icon. And while I'm sure the game will set up future installments that are destined to come after, Requiem will just as much set up the games we are yet to see remade in the glorious RE engine. When remaking games in a popular franchise like Resident Evil, throwing out random remakes left and right is not the way to go about it. It seems like recently, Capcom was deliberate in following the series chronologically when they started with remaking Resident Evil 2, as that remake followed up with Resident Evil 3 and the recently released Resident Evil 4 remake. Jumping straight into Resident Evil 5, while making sense from the chronological standpoint, would disregard the millions of newer players that have been introduced to the franchise from the more recent remakes, as those who completed RE4 Remake may be left wondering who on earth Albert Wesker is. Longtime Resident Evil fans know that Albert Wesker is perhaps the series' biggest standout villain, and by jumping straight into Resident Evil 5, the transition would not properly set up newer players, nor the established lore from these recent remakes, to accommodate the massive and important role that Wesker serves in the 5th title. That's why Code Veronica absolutely makes sense here in a potential remake, because Wesker does serve a big role here, and not only that, we see Claire and Chris Redfield develop further after the events of the Raccoon City Incident that was covered in Resident Evils 2 and 3, and continued even further in the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem. In one of my older videos, linked in the description, we looked at the supposed leak on 4chan of all places that shed light on a Code Veronica remake, fleshing out the earlier moments of the game's prologue while also adding new features of its own, like allowing players to swap between Claire Redfield and Steve Burnside in an instant. Code Veronica, like the older Resident Evil games with their fixed camera perspectives and tank controls, could absolutely benefit from a ground-up remake, featuring an over-the-shoulder perspective with revamped gameplay and controls like the recent remakes we've gotten. And this leak, yes, I will continue using quotations here to refer to it, suggests that it will be following very closely to the established gameplay we've come to know from the recent remakes. Seeing as Code Veronica not only sees Wesker get more fleshed out, we also get important story developments for Claire and Chris Redfield, of whom the latter is one of the primary protagonists of Resident Evil 5. This just makes much more sense for Code Veronica to get remade first before Resident Evil 5, and let's just hope that Capcom has been paying attention to all the fans out there who echo these sentiments. As far as leakers and insider information is concerned, grains of salt here people, longtime leaker Dusk Golem claims that Code Veronica is indeed one of the games getting a remake, and if his post in May turns out to be true, then we are in for a real treat, as the development team that brought us the fantastic Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 remakes is said to be hard at work on this remake of Code Veronica. In addition, in July 2025, Dusk reported that the directors of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 remakes are leading the Code Veronica remake project, which, I mean, come on. Those games are incredible, so provided this all turns out to be true, this is definitely exciting to hear. Fingers crossed this is truly happening, as this is easily the most requested remake of the bunch, and seeing this awesome classic reborn in the RE engine, hopefully with VR functionality and more, would be insane to see. Resident Evil 0 is another game that is often brought up in the discussion for possible remakes, and I mean, rightly so. Just like the Code Veronica remake leak from Dusk Golem, this leaker suggested that Resident Evil 0 is also getting a remake alongside Code Veronica. In addition, he reported that the Resident Evil 0 remake is being led by K2 and M2, both teams that recently did work on the Separate Ways DLC for Resident Evil 4 Remake and also served as support teams for the RE4 Remake project. More recent leaks from Dusk suggest that Resident Evil 0 Remake may actually be the first game in the new Remake Trilogy to release, which I think is a good move, seeing as this game essentially kicks off the entire franchise as a prequel to Resident Evil 1. Again, take all this with grains of salt, but considering that both Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Code Veronica both get remakes, this will do wonders in providing clarity on Albert Wesker in the events leading up to his big role in Resident Evil 5, in addition to establishing Umbrella and the major antagonists before going into the Raccoon City games with Resident Evil 2, 3, and 9, and will obviously present these games in a more presentable way for new fans of the series to engage with these classics. Again, Resident Evil 0 is another older game featuring fixed camera perspectives and tank controls, along with the frustrating inventory management as we guided Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen through the events leading up to the very first Resident Evil game. As previously mentioned, and I hate to be a broken record here, but Wesker plays an important role here, so that's another reason why RE0 is likely considered before Capcom jumps into an RE5 remake. That, and well, out of Resident Evil 0, 1, and Code Veronica, RE0 is often seen as the worst game of the three. Not that it's bad by any means, but that tweaks to the gameplay could go a long way in making this game stick the landing that much better. Alright, now this is where things get really interesting, because while most people are totally cool with seeing Resident Evil 0 get a remake, and rightly so, Resident Evil 1 remains the most polarizing. On the one hand, RE1 got a remake of its own back in 2002 on the GameCube, and has since, like Code Veronica, been made available on PS4 and Xbox One, which can be played via backwards compatibility on modern hardware. Let me just briefly gush about the awesomeness of Resident Evil Remake for just a second. RE Remake is a phenomenal remake and is easily one of my favorite RE games to this day. It's got incredible atmosphere, much improved gameplay and graphics over the original, and establishes an essential narrative that literally sets up the entire events of the franchise, along with RE0 of course. That said, for as much of a fan as I am of Resident Evil 1 Remake, this game absolutely deserves to get a remake as well. Not only is this one of the most important games in the franchise when considering the game's narrative and characters, like introducing Albert Wesker, Chris Redfield, Rebecca Chambers, and more to the franchise, but quite frankly, the game's tank controls and gameplay are seen as outdated by many fans, including some old school RE players. I've made dozens upon dozens of Resident Evil videos on this channel over the years, and I have heard from countless newer fans that they would love to experience Resident Evil 1, but without the fixed camera and tank controls. And well, guess what? That's enough to indicate to me that Capcom would want to tackle Resident Evil 1 again for another more modern remake, because at the end of the day, Capcom is a company, and they look at the money first before even going ahead and greenlighting a project. What other game in their repertoire would make as much money as a full-blown remake of the very first game, am I right? Even though polarizing, a remake of RE1 would absolutely print money, and it would not only reintroduce older players to one of the most iconic settings in the franchise, but it would also provide newer fans of the series a fresh new perspective and introduction to a bona fide classic. Can we all say no to seeing the Spencer Mansion in the RE engine? Didn't think so. Funny enough, a remake of Resident Evil 1 was rumored a year ago by BioDeclassified on Twitter, detailing key aspects of the game, where it is said to be quite a faithful remake of the 2002 remake. Very recently, Dusk Golem took to Twitter to claim that, to his knowledge, only Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil 0 remakes were in active development, with clear potential in the future to see RE1 finally get its RE engine remake. Again, none of this is confirmed, but consult this video I did going over the recent RE1 remake leaks if you're more curious about this potential project. Enough about RE1 Remake for now, but let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section about whether you'd like to see another Resident Evil 1 remake happen. Resident Evil Requiem not only ushers in the next mainline entry, but also celebrates the series as a whole by bringing the franchise back to some of its earliest roots in time for the 30th anniversary. This is a full circle moment for not just Capcom, but for Resident Evil. With it, new opportunities arise for Resident Evil going forward, with Resident Evil 10 a distant reality, but so too are further remakes of classic Resident Evil titles. With Capcom confirming that more remakes will be coming, and with 3 big games that all center around the events leading up to and immediately following the Raccoon City incident of the earlier games, only time will tell when the next Resident Evil remake will get announced, and it is exceedingly likely that the next remake will kick off what will be touted as the second Resident Evil Remake Trilogy. As always, let me know your thoughts on the future Resident Evil remakes in the comments, and follow me over to this video as we explore a ranking of the scariest Resident Evil games to date. That's all I have for you in this one, my friends. I'll see you all real soon in the next video.